4 months after the FBI found the bodies of Carol and Julie Sund and Silvina Peloso, 26-year-old Joey Ruth Armstrong was working for the Yosemite Institute, an outdoor education program that is still around to this day, although it's now called NatureBridge. Joey worked as a naturalist at Yosemite, educating visitors, especially children, about different aspects of the national park, leading hikes and backpacking trips, and helping others fall in love with nature in the way that she had. Her mother said that she was creative and lighthearted, and was known to tap dance in her hiking boots for her students. Like everyone around her, especially the other women, Joey had been horrified by the murders of the 3 female travelers, and for months had felt terrified for her own safety, but once Special Agent Maddock announced that all involved parties were already incarcerated, she told her dad that she felt safe again and wrote in her journal, "The monsters are gone." Now at this time, Joey lived with her fiancé and another roommate in a cabin that was known as the Greenhouse near Foresta, a small residential community that sits within Yosemite National Park and where park employees often lived. On Wednesday, July 21st, both Joey's fiancé and their roommate were out of town, so Joey decided to go visit her friend Caitlin Fox, who lived about 4 hours west in the Bay Area. Joey and Caitlin were chatting on the phone a little bit before 6:00 p.m., and Joey told her friend that she'd head out around 6:30, with the goal of arriving at Caitlin's place around 10. Now, Google gave us the information that this is a 4-hour drive now, so it might be that Joey planned on being a bit liberal with the speed limit, as Californians are often to be liberal, or it might just be the way that traffic has changed over the years. Anyway, around 6:30 and clearly running late, Joey called a couple who lived nearby. She worked with the husband and she was wondering if she could drop off some equipment for him. Now his wife, Susanna, had been the one to answer the phone and she told Joey to come on by. By 7:30, however, Joey still hadn't arrived, so Susanna took a walk past Joey's cabin and found her white pickup truck still parked outside and the doors to the cabin left open. Susanna's calls to Joey and knocks on the door were met with silence, and while Susanna thought this was strange, she didn't assume it was serious, so she went back home. Over in the Bay Area, on the other hand, Caitlin was waiting for her friend to show up, but when midnight hit and Joey still hadn't arrived, Caitlin contacted the police, which is just like, finally somebody is contacting the police at an appropriate time. The next morning, Yosemite Park Ranger Mark Harvey received Caitlin's missing persons report for Joey Armstrong, and a search and rescue team was dispatched to the surrounding area, including a nearby creek. It didn't take long for them to find Joey's partially submerged body along the bank of that creek, finding that her pants had been unbuttoned and her shirt and part of her bra were pulled up to expose one of her breasts. What took search and rescue longer to find was Joey's head, which cadaver dogs eventually discovered about 40 feet away in the bottom of the creek. Investigators determined her cause of death to be exsanguination, caused by a deep cut across her throat that appeared to be made with a serrated knife. The killer had then finished by cutting off her head. That same afternoon, Carrie Stainer was interviewed by a National Park Service special agent, but only as a potential witness. Despite the clearly messy crime scene and the discovery of Joey's body, Carrie still wasn't on investigators' radar. Instead, a Yosemite firefighter had reported seeing a baby blue International Scout with a white stripe parked near Joey's cabin on the night of her murder, and a park ranger reported picking up a hitchhiker who had been standing next to a baby blue Scout with a white stripe that same night. Investigators thought that it was possible the owner of the vehicle had seen something potentially helpful, and deputies of Mariposa County soon spotted the same baby blue Scout parked near a popular nude beach, waiting for the owner, Carey, to finish nakedly smoking his joint, and then asked if they could search his car and backpack. And while he was cool with them going through the Scout, he didn't seem to want to give his backpack up, causing the agents to suddenly worry that Joey's head might be inside. Ultimately, though, they didn't find anything and let him go, taking note that he'd been weird about the backpack despite the fact that it didn't have anything of note in it. Investigators would later find out that while the deputies were searching his car, Carey had hurriedly unloaded the knife, gun, and gloves he'd been carrying in the backpack and hid them under logs and rocks close by. The last time Carey was seen by his co-workers was that night, when he asked a group of Cedar Lodge employees if any of them wanted to buy the TV and VCR he was selling, which one of them did. Carey then didn't show up for work the next day, but he did close his bank account, and he also tried one more time to murder his girlfriend and her daughters, showing up at Janet's house around 12:45 a.m. and telling her that his car had broken down. He was only thwarted in his plans when he realized that Janet's other boyfriend was there, because there's just no end to the twists in this story. And whether Carrie was planning on leaving town or just disappearing into the national forest, he couldn't seem to resist another chance to stand shoulder to shoulder with his nudist brethren, because that's what he was doing when the FBI caught up with him again. As it turns out, the FBI had put a bolo out on Carrie when they found out that he hadn't turned up for work at the Cedar Lodge, since this was apparently the first time he had ever missed a day of work in a year and a half. And one of the guests at the Laguna del Sol clothing optional resort recognized Carrie and called the authorities. Special Agent Reineck was one of the agents sent to pick Carrie up, and he described a pretty funny situation where he brought Carrie into his car, still thinking Carrie was just a witness. They had to wait for another FBI agent to get clearance for them to proceed, but because they're FBI agents who just showed up to a nudist resort, everyone was super curious about what was going on, and soon their car was surrounded by naked looky-loos of all shapes and sizes. After dispersing the crowd of nudist onlookers, FBI agents brought Carrie in to question him about Joey Armstrong's murder, and despite the agents still believing he was just a witness, Carrie almost immediately broke down. His drive with Special Agent Reineck from the resort to the office for questioning had been slowed due to construction, so the two men had built up a rapport of sorts, and shortly after everyone was settled into the office, Carrie dissolved into sobs. He told Reineck, "Jeff, I'm a bad person, and I've done some really bad things." He said he was impotent and had never had a normal sexual relationship, that he was constantly in a state of heightened anxiety, and that he couldn't control behaviors that temporarily relieved that anxiety. He confessed to having obsessive, violent thoughts about girls and women, about the fact that he'd been by an uncle the same year that his brother was kidnapped, and that he had never been able to get on with his life as a result. And remember, at this point, Agent Reineck still thought that Carrie was just a witness. Sure, they'd handcuffed him at the nudist resort, but that was only because it was standard practice when they didn't know if a situation was secure. Agent Reineck still thought he was about to write down some things Carrie saw near his car the other night, but instead, Carrie told Reineck that he could give investigators closure on the Joey Armstrong case, before hinting that he also had information about Carol and Julie Sund and Silvina Peloso. But while Agent Reineck was working to pick his jaw up from its newly found position on the floor, Carrie also had some demands to make. He wanted videos of young girls, and that was not all. He also wanted his family to receive the $250,000 in reward money for finding Carol and Julie Sund, and he wanted to be incarcerated in the prison close to his hometown of Merced. When Agent Reineck told Carrie to prioritize the one request that was most important to him, likely hoping that, Carrie would pick the telling him where the bodies were and taking the reward money, and, therefore the important one of, prioritizing the importance of giving the victim's family some closure is what I'm trying to say. He was hoping Carrie would do that. The good thing that would benefit both his family and bring some closure to the other families. When Reineck gave him that opportunity, when Reineck told him to prioritize, Carrie said that he would like the porn please, and also now, which was kind of a deal breaker for how Reineck was going to proceed from there. Now, through some pretty incredible convincing and several breaks so he could leave the room to vent his rage and disgust, Agent Reineck eventually did get Carrie's confession without the need for the FBI to provide child materials to a which is a win in my book. So what did that confession consist of? Well, Carrie told the FBI that back in 1982, during one of his family's many trips to Yosemite, he was in the Foresta area when he saw Bigfoot. And so the reason he had been wandering near Joey Armstrong's cabin was to see if he could spot Bigfoot again. Now, of course, this was a lie, as are most people's claims about Bigfoot that we've talked about on our channel. That's not to say that Bigfoot's not real. That's not to say that. We're just talking about people lying about Bigfoot right now. Let's all settle down. He might have seen Bigfoot in 1982, but maybe, if he saw Bigfoot in 1982 is irrelevant to whether or not that was why he was out there that night. He might have seen Bigfoot, but he was lying about why he was there. Anyway, Carrie ultimately admitted that the need to kill had been building inside of him that day. The day he killed Joey, and that when he spotted Joey outside of her cabin, filling the bed of her truck with essentials for her trip, he knew that he was going to kill her. This is evidenced by the fact that he had his backpack with him that day, filled with the essentials he needed to murder someone, and he went back to his truck and got it as soon as he saw Joey. He started chatting with her, asking if she'd ever seen Bigfoot or heard about him, to which she said no, but maybe one of her roommates had. Carrie asked if either of them was around so that he could ask them about Bigfoot, and she said that no one was home except for her. And that's when something in Carrie's brain clicked. He immediately pulled out his gun, forced her into the house, and duct taped her hands behind her back before bringing her outside again and putting her in the backseat of his truck. It all happened so fast, and yet Joey fought against him the entire time, struggling so much that she broke through her duct tape bindings twice. Once she was in the car, she continued to struggle, kick, and scream through the duct tape around her mouth, and before Carrie had driven more than a quarter mile, Joey was somehow able to launch herself headfirst out of the truck's open window, hit the ground, get back up, and start running. Carrie, now in a full panic and with any semblance of a fantasy interaction gone, slammed on the brakes and ran after her. And even though she put up an incredible, valiant fight, she wasn't able to run fast enough, with the 6'1" tall Carrie catching up to Joey and dragging her toward the creek. She continued to struggle every step of the way, which appears to have frustrated Carrie because, unlike the last time, he pulled out his knife and cut her throat right there. But horrifyingly, the cut did not prove deep enough, so after pulling Joey a little bit further down the creek bed, he viciously put his foot on her head and sliced her throat open. He then decided that he would finish the job, cutting her head completely off, and after washing the blood off of her face, he placed her head farther down on the bank. He later stated that removing her head was part of his escalating compulsive thoughts, and by that point in the attack, he wanted to do the most revolting thing he could possibly do. As part of his confession, Carrie would accompany FBI agents to the creek, pointing out the location of the knife he had used to kill Joey, and on that same day, July 25th, 1999, Carrie Stainer was officially charged in the murder of Joey Armstrong. 2 days later, the San Francisco Chronicle wrote how an unidentified source had told them that a grand jury was reportedly looking into whether that group of meth users was also involved in the murders because it's very difficult to believe that Stainer did this on his own. That unidentified source sounds a lot like Agent Maddock, in our opinion, because he really had his heart set on those meth users being responsible, and after Joey Armstrong was murdered, despite his assurances that all parties involved in the triple homicide were in jail for other reasons, he stated that he had asked himself whether we could have done anything differently that might have prevented the murder of Joey Armstrong, but I'm confident that we'd done everything we could have done. I would personally argue that not telling everyone they could let their guard down was what they should have done. But this is not the first time we've covered a story where a person involved in law enforcement decides they know what happened and just will not let it go, no matter how massive the mountain of evidence against that possibility is. Like a certain guy named something that rhymes with Boo Schwit in a town that rhymes with colder, in a state called something that rhymes with Dollarado.